Good morning and welcome to Unstoppable Daily. My name is Laura Collins and I'm so glad to be here with you this morning. And Unstoppable Daily is a space where we worship together and we hear a short devotion from one of our pastors. So I really hope that this morning is an encouragement to you. And for the last 6 weeks, we've been in a series called Unstoppable. And our number one goal with Unstoppable is 100% participation. So I want to say thank you so much for participating with us, for engaging in Unstoppable through these last 6 weeks. This series is going to change the trajectory of our church forever, and we're so glad that you got to be a part of it. Now, if you want to continue to participate in generosity with us, there are multiple ways that you can do that. You can give online, you can give via the Compass app, or you can give through texting. And again, we want to say thank you for helping us reach our goals through Unstoppable and just changing the life and structure of our church and our community and our state and our country and our world. We can't do it without you, so we want to say thank you. Now let's step into our time of worship together.
Good morning, Compass, and welcome to another amazing morning of Unstoppable Daily. This morning, we're going to sing a song with a simple message. We are praying that God would keep us close to Him. Our prayer this morning is that God would tether us to His goodness and His love. Love like a river cuts through stone. You set out and found me wherever I roam. And oh, won't you tether this restless heart of mine? And won't you capture me in your love, even when I try to fight? And oh, won't you tether this restless heart of mine? Sing love like an anchor. Love like an anchor, hold to my soul. You speak my language, you know me down to the bone. And oh, won't you tether this restless heart of mine? And won't you capture me in your love, even when I try to fight? And oh, won't you tether this restless heart of mine? And I wanna be, I wanna be, I wanna be just where you are. Sing, I wanna be, I wanna be, I want to be, I wanna be just where you are. And oh, won't you tether this restless heart of mine? And won't you capture me in your love, even when I try to find? And oh, won't you tether this restless heart of mine? Yeah. And won't you capture me in your love, even when I try to fight? And oh, won't you tether this restless heart of mine? Amen.
Hey, welcome to Unstoppable Daily. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. In case we haven't met, my name's Nate. I'm one of the pastors here at Compass. Actually, I'm the campus pastor at our North Fort Worth location. And I'm glad that you're joining us for this special Unstoppable Daily series that we're in. If this is your first time, hey, thanks for joining us and for being here. Well, over the last few weeks, we've been digging into this New Testament book of Acts, and we've been talking about how we can live out what we see happening in the book of Acts. And really what this Unstoppable initiative is all about is what we see here in Acts, that we're striving to be just like this church that we see here in Acts here at Compass. Just like we see these early church followers in the early church, we want to do the things that they're doing. And listen, I would encourage you, if you haven't read through the book of Acts, like during this series, I would encourage you to take some time and read through those 28 chapters over these next few weeks, because there's so much that I think we can take away and we can apply to our lives and even to the church today. I'd also encourage you to go back and watch any of the last few weeks of these recordings that you may have missed as well, because I think they can be so helpful in our journey as we figure out what it looks like to be unstoppable. Well, a few years ago, something that nobody would have expected except for maybe a few people that know all of the rules when it comes to the NHL saw happen. Now, I'll admit, I'm not a huge hockey fan. It's a little too hard to follow for me and a little bit boring, but this story caught my attention. It caught the attention of sports fans around the world. On March 29, 2018, Scott Foster, a 36-year-old accountant who hadn't played a professional hockey game. He hadn't even actually played against competition in over a decade, but because of his background as a goalie for the Western Michigan University hockey team, he had been designated by the Chicago Blackhawks as their emergency goalie. Now, this honor is usually something that just results in some free food and opportunity to sit in the press box of that team. And this wasn't Foster's first time in this role. But on this night, after the two active goalies for the Blackhawks were injured, Foster was called into service. Now, Foster, he was sitting in the stands and he was in his street clothes. Literally, he wasn't expecting to get in the game, but he gets the call that he's up. And so he walks down from the stands, he puts on the gear, and he takes the ice. Foster, who in an interview later after the game said the only thing that he recalled prior to walking on the ice was the coach saying this: "Put on your helmet. It's your time." Now, whatever mental zone Foster entered as he took the ice, it worked because Foster ended up stopping all 7 shots that were taken to him on goal that night. And he earned the team belt that night, which is reserved for the game's best player, the team's best player. Now, this story, it made news everywhere. It was all over social media. Sports media outlets were covering this story because nobody could believe a guy who had never played professional hockey before would just come out of the stands and save the game for the Blackhawks. And for many, seeing this guy literally walk down from the stands, suit up, and walk on the ice and help win the game for the Blackhawks was something that no one would have ever expected or maybe even thought was possible. Now here's why I share that story with you today. You see, like Scott Foster, maybe others have overlooked you in life. But I think there's something that we see in the story that I want to look at today in Acts 26 that proves that even while others may overlook you, know that God has a mission in mind for each of us. And no matter how unlikely that might seem, you may even not think right now that it's possible, or because of your past or because of your history, that you don't think that God could ever use you. What we see in the story that we want to look at today is that God can use everything that has happened in our lives to prepare us, even when we don't feel ready, or we just feel like we're sitting in the stands spectating with no intention of being called to get into the game. So it's here in Acts 26. We find this guy named Paul. We've been talking about Paul over these last few weeks. And Paul, he's standing before this king, this guy by the name of King Agrippa. He's been in prison because the Jewish religious leaders and the priests, Honestly, they don't like that Paul's been going around telling everyone about what Jesus has done for them and that Jesus is alive, that he resurrected from the dead. And so over the past several chapters as we've been studying this, Paul, he's been trying to plead his case to these high-ranking officials. And as we get to chapter 26, he now has the chance to speak to King Agrippa and defend himself. And so as Paul begins his defense, he simply starts out by telling the story of how his life was forever changed. We talked about it a few weeks ago on a weekend experience on the Unstoppable Surrender message. I encourage you to go back and watch that if you missed it. But essentially, Paul goes into detail and he's like, listen, I'm the last guy that anybody would have expected to be sharing about Jesus. In fact, I was on the opposite side. I was the guy who was trying to take out the people who believed in Jesus, who followed Jesus, because I thought that they were crazy. But then it happened. He's like, I literally had this encounter. Literally, the song Blinded by the Light, yeah, that's my story. And Paul proceeds to share how on this road to Damascus, when he is literally blinded by God, God called him out and he called him to be his witness. And God says this to Paul in Acts 26. This is what he says starting in verses 16 to 18. He says, now get to your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and witness. So Paul's like, listen, I got the call from the stands to be God's witness. God says, hey, it's time to get in the game. And that's what I'm doing. And then he goes on to say this. He says, tell people that you have seen me and tell them what I will show you in the future. And I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Yes, I am sending you to the Gentiles to open their eyes so they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. Then they will receive forgiveness for their sins and be given a place among God's people who are set apart by faith in me. So Paul's like, God told me, go and tell other people about the good news that he has promised. And that he has said that as I go about this, God is going to protect me wherever I go to share this message. And then what Paul says next, I think is key. Verses 19 to 22, Paul says, and so King Agrippa, catch this, he says, I obeyed the vision from heaven. I preached first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem and all throughout Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that all must repent of their sins and turn to God and prove they have changed by the good things they do. So some Jews arrested me in the temple for preaching this, and they tried to kill me, but God has protected me right up to this present time, so I can testify to everyone from the least to the greatest. I teach nothing except what the prophets and Moses said would happen. Paul says, I obeyed this vision from heaven. He's following through on this calling that God had for him. And like Paul, there's a call for all of us who are followers of Christ to be obedient to the call that God has for our lives as well. Because the fact is this, we weren't called to just sit in the stands and be observers. That was never what God intended for his followers to be. You see, we've got this greater calling. We talked about it in the first week of this Unstoppable series in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Jesus, he said this, he says, you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. You see, Paul took that call seriously, and so should we, because there's far too much at stake. There are people that you and I know who need to hear about the amazing grace of Jesus that is available to them. What I love about Paul, though, is that Paul is a guy who truly was unstoppable when it came to telling others about Jesus. Actually, I love this dialogue that happens next between Paul and another high-ranking official, this guy named Festus, who he's really another powerful guy that Paul had already tried to plead his case to. But catch what Paul says in verse 24. This is actually Festus talking to Paul. He says, Paul, you are insane. Too much study has made you crazy. For Festus, this was just too much for him to handle. Like he thinks that Paul has lost his mind, blaming Jesus' death on his own people, the Jews. But Paul responds by saying this in verse 25. It says, but Paul replied, I am not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is the sober truth. Now, as I'm reading this, like I always try to picture what's happening in this moment. I think this is where you cue Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men saying, "You can't handle the truth," right? Like that's what I see Paul saying here. And then notice what Paul says next. And King Agrippa knows about these things. I speak boldly, for I am sure these events are all familiar to him, for they were not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. King Agrippa interrupted him. Do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly? And then catch what Paul says next. And Paul replied, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that both you and everyone in this audience might become the same as I am, except for these chains. To me, this is such a powerful statement that Paul makes here. He says, I pray to God that you, Agrippa, and everyone in this room would come to the same conclusion that I have and believe what Jesus has done for you. And the reason that Paul's doing this is because Paul had been called out by God to move forward this message and the mission, and nothing was going to stop him. Not even standing in front of some powerful men, knowing that his life might hang in their balance, like knowing that this could be the end for him. Nothing was going to stop him. You see, Paul lived a life committed to this unstoppable mission. He lived with this unstoppable surrender to this calling and this unstoppable boldness in the midst of the adversity, all because he wanted to make sure that everyone he encountered knew about God's saving and amazing grace. You're like Paul. As Christ followers, we need to live with the same kind of surrender and boldness and live on mission, not being afraid to share what we know with others. Now, I just want you to imagine what would happen if we actually live like this. Can you imagine if this really was our mindset? Imagine the number of people who will join us in heaven one day if we get out of the stands and we share our faith with boldness like Paul. Now, I want to encourage you to be unstoppable when it comes to telling others about Jesus and live with this mindset like Paul, to take as many people as you can to heaven with you one day. You know, during the course of this Unstoppable initiative, I've been getting to meet with a whole lot of people to share this vision that we have, and I've had the opportunity to share the story with them about one of my grandfathers. I know him as Pop. And what I've been telling them is that while my Pop isn't here on this earth anymore, my Pop, when he was here, he was a pastor, even though he wasn't a pastor. Like I get paid to do this job, but my Pop didn't get paid by a church. He wasn't an official pastor, but he was a pastor. You see, my Pop was actually he was an office supply salesman. He actually owned the business, and up until the day he retired, my Pop would go out every single day and he would call on his customers. He would actually hand deliver the office supplies to their businesses for whatever it was that they needed. But whenever my Pop, he went to these places and he visited his customers, he didn't just talk business with them. Actually, he talked about two specific things. He talked about his family, and he always talked about Jesus. And when my Pop passed away several years ago, we had planned calling hours to go from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. and then take a little break and go from 7 to 9 p.m. Well, that night, there was a line that just didn't stop. We didn't know it. But on that day, we saw this incredible impact that he had on the lives of many people, and people that were people we didn't even know in our family. And you want to know what the number one thing that people said that he talked about? What they said is that he always told us about his family, and he always talked about Jesus. See, my Pop wasn't afraid to share his faith. He wanted those that he encountered to know about Jesus. And this is how Paul lived his life. This is how we should live our lives as well. And look, you don't have to be a pastor to be used by God and to share about Jesus. Actually, all you got to do is you've just got to be willing. I'm praying that you'd be willing that you'd be unstoppable, that you'd have this unstoppable faith, that you would have this unstoppable boldness and surrender, and that you would live out this unstoppable mission that Jesus has called us to as his followers. So I want to encourage you, maybe there's somebody you know who needs to hear about the love of Jesus. Be like Paul this week and share that message in hopes that maybe, just maybe, they'll come to that relationship with Jesus. So as we kind of wrap up today, I just want to pray for you. I want to pray that God would give you boldness like Paul. I want to pray that God would give you the faith that you need to trust in him, whatever it is that he might be asking you to do. Would you pray with me? Father, today, I just pray that you would give us faith to step out in boldness, God, to what you're calling us to. God, I pray through Unstoppable that we be able to navigate thousands and thousands of people to God because of our generosity and our willingness to do whatever you call us to and do whatever it takes. God, there'd be people that we might never even meet here on this earth who will end up in heaven because we take those unstoppable steps of faith, that we would surrender, that we would be bold, that we would just live out this unstoppable generosity in how we use our time, how we use our talents, how we give of our treasure. But most of all, God, I just pray for the interactions and the opportunities that we have with others. Help us to share our faith with boldness and be like Paul, not be afraid to tell others about what you've done for us. God, we thank you for that gift. We pray all this in your name. Amen.
Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I hope that you're feeling encouraged after that time of worship and hearing that message. And I want to let you know that this weekend we are starting a brand new series here at Compass called 3 Questions Everyone Has About God. And this is a great series to invite a friend to, where we're going to tackle some of those most asked questions about God. It's a great series for anyone, whether you've been in church for a long time or if you have someone in your life who's questioning faith and would like to know more about God. This is the series for them. So make sure that you join us. If you want more information on our campus times and locations, you can go to compass.church for all of that information. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.